The world had never seen weapons of such staggering ambition. Towering behemoths of steel, their barrels stretching farther than many could fathom, these were not ordinary artillery pieces. They were the culmination of Nazi engineering obsession, designed to annihilate fortifications, obliterate cities, and intimidate entire nations. Hitler's vision was audacious. He sought not merely to conquer territory, but to rewrite the balance of power through technological terror. These supercannons, often built in secret, required enormous resources, meticulous planning, and vast labor forces to assemble. Yet their failure would reveal the limits of ambition divorced from practical strategy. Behind the massive iron walls of testing grounds and industrial complexes, engineers and soldiers worked with precision and urgency. Each component had to endure extraordinary pressures, withstand massive recoil, and deliver shells over distances that defied conventional artillery knowledge. Tens of thousands of men toiled under exacting standards, welding, calibrating, and testing mechanisms that represented both innovation and obsession. The psychological toll on workers was immense. They were constructing weapons that embodied the darkest fantasies of a totalitarian regime, while knowing that even a minor miscalculation could result in catastrophic failure. The sheer scale of the supercannons was awe-inspiring. One barrel alone could stretch over 30 meters, dwarfing the soldiers who maneuvered around it. Entire rail systems were modified to transport components, sometimes requiring weeks of preparation and dozens of locomotives to haul segments through forests, fields, and industrial centers. When operational, the cannons could fire shells hundreds of kilometers, theoretically reaching cities far behind enemy lines. For Hitler, each launch represented not only a tactical opportunity but a symbol of dominance, an attempt to project omnipotence through technological might. Yet, operational reality often diverged sharply from vision. Mechanical malfunctions, transportation difficulties, and logistical constraints plagued even the most meticulously planned deployments. Engineers faced the immense challenge of aligning massive barrels with precision, accounting for shell weight, atmospheric conditions, and recoil dynamics. Soldiers trained for weeks to coordinate firing sequences, yet even a slight miscalculation could render the weapon useless or cause catastrophic damage to the crew. Each failure chipped away at morale, underscoring that monumental scale did not guarantee effectiveness, and that terror alone could not substitute for practical strategy. Strategically, Hitler's obsession with supercannons diverted critical resources from areas of immediate operational importance. Factories, labor forces, and materials were allocated to these projects, while frontline units struggled with shortages of ammunition, vehicles, and equipment. Commanders on the ground often regarded the supercannons as a distant threat, symbols of propaganda rather than instruments of decisive warfare. The disconnect between grandiose technological vision and battlefield necessity highlighted a persistent flaw in Nazi strategic thinking, prioritizing spectacle and intimidation over achievable tactical gains. The Allies, aware of the supercannons, approached the threat with a combination of reconnaissance, counterintelligence, and proactive disruption. Aerial surveillance monitored production facilities and test sites, revealing weaknesses in supply lines and construction processes. Sabotage operations by resistance networks and special forces targeted transportation routes, rail systems, and critical components, often delaying deployment and reducing operational effectiveness. The perceived terror of the weapons was mitigated by pragmatic Allied planning, demonstrating that even seemingly unstoppable technology could be countered with intelligence, precision, and adaptability. Within the testing grounds, each firing was both a spectacle and a trial. Massive explosions reverberated across landscapes, shaking the earth and sending clouds of smoke into the sky. Engineers meticulously recorded data on velocity, trajectory, and structural integrity, yet the unpredictability of such colossal mechanisms often led to anomalies. Shells occasionally veered off course, failed to detonate, or caused unintended damage. These results were deeply embarrassing for propaganda purposes, as the weapons intended to intimidate appeared erratic and unreliable. For Hitler, each unsuccessful test was a blow to both ego and strategy, illustrating the fragile boundary between ambition and reality. Propaganda surrounding the supercannons amplified the mystique, often exaggerating their capabilities far beyond operational reality. Posters, Newsreels and speeches depicted the cannons as unstoppable engines of destruction, capable of shattering cities and demoralizing entire populations. Soldiers on the ground and citizens in occupied territories were told that these weapons symbolized technological supremacy. In practice, however, the cannons' deployment was limited, their mobility constrained, and their impact localized. The gap between perception and reality demonstrated the Nazi reliance on psychological influence, yet also underscored how overconfidence in untested technology could distort strategic priorities. Operational deployment of supercannons was limited and fraught with complications. Transporting such colossal artillery required weeks of preparation, and assembly at the front often faced enemy observation, sabotage attempts, and logistical challenges. Crews struggled to align targets accurately, account for environmental factors, and coordinate artillery support. In several engagements, the weapons achieved partial success, destroying targeted fortifications or infrastructure, but rarely produced the decisive outcomes envisioned by high command. Soldiers operating alongside these weapons adapted to limitations, improvising strategies and combining firepower with conventional units to maximize impact. Failures of these supercannons became emblematic of the broader challenges facing Nazi military strategy. Technological ambition alone could not compensate for the increasingly dire realities of multi-front war, supply shortages, and Allied adaptability. Commanders confronted a growing mismatch between strategic promises and battlefield outcomes, as resources funneled into massive projects yielded limited returns. Even as Hitler invested further in these colossal weapons, soldiers and engineers understood that the supercannon's practical value was overshadowed by logistical, mechanical, and tactical constraints. Resistance networks and espionage activities further undermined the effectiveness of supercannon projects. Allied operatives infiltrated factories, relayed critical intelligence, and disrupted supply chains. Sabotage operations damaged components during transport, delaying assembly and compromising structural integrity. Information gathered through reconnaissance allowed targeted counterattacks that neutralized the potential impact of the cannons before they could influence major engagements. This interplay of intelligence, sabotage, and tactical awareness highlighted the vulnerabilities of relying on extraordinary technology without secure operational frameworks. In practice, the supercannons' symbolic significance often outweighed their actual battlefield utility. Their presence inspired fear in theory, but the Allied response demonstrated that psychological impact alone could not determine the outcome of campaigns. Strategic coordination, flexibility, and conventional force deployment neutralized much of the perceived threat. Soldiers on both sides adapted to these massive weapons, developing counter-battery strategies, alternative defensive measures, and operational contingencies. The narrative of terror crafted by Nazi propaganda was consistently undercut by practical realities, revealing the limits of awe-inspiring engineering when disconnected from tactical feasibility. The labor force behind these projects bore tremendous physical and psychological burdens. Thousands of workers endured grueling schedules, harsh conditions, and the ever-present risk of accidents. Many were conscripted or compelled to participate, navigating moral dilemmas and fear of reprisal. The immense scale of construction, transportation, and assembly imposed physical constraints that slowed progress, increased error rates, and compounded operational risks. Each delay, mishap, or technical failure became both a logistical challenge and a symbolic defeat, illustrating the human limitations inherent in executing grandiose technological visions. Even as the war intensified on multiple fronts, Hitler remained fixated on supercannon projects. He envisioned them as instruments capable of reversing setbacks and restoring momentum, yet operational reality consistently undermined these expectations. Battles demonstrated that mobility, coordination, and adaptability were far more decisive than sheer destructive potential. Units equipped with conventional artillery, supported by air power and infantry, could achieve objectives more reliably than colossal, mechanically unpredictable weapons. The gap between ideological ambition and battlefield practicality became increasingly evident, shaping the eventual outcomes of engagements and reinforcing the lessons of strategic humility. By the time Allied forces advanced into territories threatened by supercannons, the limitations of these weapons had become undeniable. Deployment was slow, targeting accuracy was inconsistent, and mechanical failures were frequent. Soldiers familiar with the terrain, supported by air reconnaissance and intelligence, mitigated potential threats effectively. The symbolic power of the supercannons, once immense in propaganda, was reduced to a cautionary tale. Monumental engineering might inspire awe, but without integrated strategy, mobility, and practical coordination, its impact could be neutralized. The deployment of Hitler's supercannons required not only engineering brilliance but also unprecedented logistical coordination. Entire rail networks were repurposed, bridges reinforced, and roads widened to accommodate the immense weight and size of these weapons. Convoys moved at painstakingly slow speeds, often under the constant threat of Allied reconnaissance aircraft or sabotage by resistance fighters. Engineers meticulously monitored structural integrity throughout transit. Even minor vibrations or misalignments could render sections unusable. The transportation alone demanded weeks of preparation, with each segment of the cannon a massive logistical challenge. Soldiers and civilian workers alike labored under immense pressure, aware that any misstep could compromise not only the weapon but the broader strategic objectives dependent upon it. Upon arrival at designated firing sites, assembly was equally daunting. Massive cranes, temporary scaffolds, and specialized tools were required to position and align the enormous barrels. Teams of technicians adjusted angles with precision to account for shell trajectory, wind conditions, and potential recoil displacement. Supervisors enforced rigid protocols, understanding that errors could produce catastrophic consequences for both crew and nearby equipment. The intense pressure produced a heightened atmosphere of tension. Each successful assembly felt like a minor triumph, each delay a looming threat. The interplay of human skill and mechanical engineering became a daily balancing act, highlighting the extraordinary demands of operating weapons on such an unprecedented scale. Despite meticulous planning, unforeseen complications emerged. In some instances, barrels bent slightly under their own weight, alignment mechanisms failed, or calibration instruments provided inconsistent readings. Engineers developed innovative solutions in real time, improvising with available materials to stabilize structures or adjust firing parameters. Soldiers, often responsible for both operational and protective duties, adapted quickly, learning to anticipate potential issues before they became critical. These challenges underscored the limits of ambition. Even the most advanced technology remained vulnerable to human error, environmental variables, and mechanical unpredictability. The supercannons were intended to deliver both physical destruction and psychological terror. Allied intelligence was acutely aware of these massive artillery pieces, prompting careful analysis and contingency planning. Air reconnaissance tracked movement patterns, identifying assembly points, rail routes, and operational staging areas. Resistance networks provided critical information, reporting unusual activity or delayed transport, sometimes facilitating targeted disruption. Counterintelligence strategies were developed to confuse German commanders regarding Allied awareness, creating layers of uncertainty and compounding operational stress. Despite their potential, the supercannons faced constant pressure from intelligence-driven countermeasures, highlighting the complex interplay between technology and strategy. Firing operations presented their own array of challenges. Calculating the precise trajectory for shells that traveled hundreds of kilometers demanded exacting attention to detail. Variations in air density, temperature, and wind could alter impact points drastically. Crews adjusted calculations continuously, yet even minor errors could cause catastrophic failures. Some rounds detonated prematurely, damaging infrastructure or equipment, while others fell short, rendering them ineffective. Each launch became a high-stakes test of human judgment and mechanical precision, revealing the fragile line between engineering marvel and operational liability. Psychological factors weighed heavily on crews operating these weapons. Soldiers were acutely aware of the destructive potential at their fingertips, as well as the consequences of failure. Tension was constant, exacerbated by the knowledge that their efforts were under scrutiny from both superiors and the public eye through propaganda channels. The morale of crews often fluctuated based on success or failure. Triumph reinforced confidence, while misfires bred apprehension and frustration. The human element remained central. No matter how powerful the machinery, operational success depended entirely on the skill, focus, and composure of those responsible for its deployment. Strategically, the supercannon's role was more symbolic than decisive. High command envisioned them as instruments capable of breaking enemy morale, destroying key infrastructure, and forcing strategic recalibration. In practice, their slow mobility, limited accuracy, and vulnerability to disruption significantly reduced effectiveness. Frontline commanders often viewed them with skepticism, prioritizing conventional artillery, armored units, and air support for operational objectives. The disparity between strategic vision and battlefield reality reflected a recurring challenge for Nazi military planning, prioritizing impressive technology over practical utility and adaptive strategy. Allied forces adapted quickly to the presence of these formidable weapons. Reconnaissance and intelligence gathering allowed precise countermeasures to be implemented. Artillery units positioned beyond the effective range of the supercannons could conduct harassing fire, while engineering teams demolished critical segments of rail lines and bridges to hinder transport. Sabotage operations, often executed by resistance cells, targeted critical components, disrupting assembly and delaying deployment. These measures not only reduced the threat posed by the supercannons but also demonstrated the ability of well-coordinated intelligence, improvisation, and local initiative to neutralize seemingly overwhelming technological advantages. Operational secrecy compounded challenges. Supercannon projects were shrouded in secrecy, with crews and engineers restricted from discussing details beyond essential personnel. This limited information sharing and complicated coordination across units. Maintenance issues required immediate resolution, yet knowledge constraints often slowed problem-solving. Communication relied on specialized codes and secure channels, and any lapse could result in misalignment, delay, or operational failure. The combination of immense scale, mechanical complexity, and secrecy created a high-pressure environment where adaptability and rapid problem-solving were indispensable. Despite these hurdles, occasional successes reinforced faith in the supercannons. During limited operational tests, shells destroyed key fortifications, rail depots, and supply storage points. These partial achievements were celebrated within Nazi command as proof of ingenuity and technological superiority. Yet the sporadic nature of successes highlighted the inherent limitations. Even when functional, these weapons could not deliver consistent or decisive outcomes across dynamic battlefronts. The juxtaposition of awe-inspiring power with practical unreliability underscored the gap between strategic aspiration and operational reality. The labor-intensive construction process exposed another vulnerability: human factors. Workers endured long hours, fatigue, and hazardous conditions, increasing the likelihood of mistakes or accidents. Skilled engineers were often stretched thin, managing multiple sites or components simultaneously. Temporary shortages of materials further slowed progress, creating cascading delays. Soldiers responsible for operational readiness navigated these constraints while maintaining safety and efficiency. The enormity of the project placed extraordinary demands on human endurance and ingenuity, emphasizing that technological ambition alone could not guarantee success without sustained human effort. Each cannon's deployment required meticulous coordination with supporting units. Artillery, infantry, and logistical teams had to synchronize operations, account for terrain, and adapt to environmental conditions. Even minor misalignment could drastically reduce effectiveness, requiring rapid recalibration. Combined arms operations demanded constant communication and precise execution, testing the limits of both planning and adaptability. Crews learned to anticipate complications, implement contingencies, and optimize coordination, yet the inherent complexity remained a persistent obstacle. Allied countermeasures evolved in response to operational experience. Reconnaissance missions identified firing patterns and operational timelines, allowing precise targeting of supply lines and staging areas. Resistance networks provided real-time intelligence, reporting movement and vulnerabilities. Engineers and demolition teams executed sabotage with remarkable efficiency, disrupting transport and assembly, further limiting the supercannon's strategic impact. These efforts exemplified the dynamic interplay between offensive ambition and defensive ingenuity, revealing how intelligence, adaptability, and human initiative could neutralize technological advantages. As engagements unfolded, it became increasingly clear that the supercannons could not fulfill the monumental expectations imposed upon them. While they achieved isolated successes, the combination of mechanical unreliability, logistical constraints, and countermeasures limited operational impact. Strategic planners recalibrated expectations, recognizing that conventional units, air power, and mobility were far more decisive. The supercannons remained symbols of ambition and psychological intimidation rather than instruments of decisive military change, illustrating the limits of engineering when divorced from adaptability and strategic coherence. Even in defeat, the lessons were profound. Engineers and soldiers gained invaluable insights into large-scale artillery operations, logistics, and coordination. Observers from both sides studied the challenges of deploying super-heavy weapons, recognizing that practical limitations could outweigh theoretical capabilities. The human dimension, ingenuity, problem-solving, and endurance, proved as critical as technical sophistication, highlighting enduring truths about warfare. Resources, coordination, and adaptability determine outcomes more than mere destructive potential. The very design of Hitler's supercannons revealed an obsession with scale over practicality. Engineers sought to maximize destructive potential without fully accounting for the operational realities that would define effectiveness in the field. Each barrel, weighing hundreds of tons, had to withstand immense pressures with precision alignment, all while accommodating shells that dwarfed conventional ammunition. Engineers debated metallurgy, recoil mechanisms, and stabilization techniques endlessly, often revising blueprints to address unforeseen stresses. The result was a marvel of mechanical engineering, yet a fragile and temperamental instrument when removed from the controlled conditions of test grounds. Transportation remained a perpetual obstacle. Moving colossal components required specially reinforced railcars, temporary bridges, and extensive clearing of terrain obstacles. Convoys proceeded at painstakingly slow paces, vulnerable to both environmental hazards and enemy observation. Resistance groups became adept at exploiting these vulnerabilities, sabotaging tracks, felling trees, and obstructing paths. Even minor disruptions could cause cascading delays, forcing crews to improvise repairs or reroute entire segments. The logistical burden consumed significant manpower and material, often exceeding the combined cost of conventional artillery units that could deliver more consistent results with far less effort. Once deployed, positioning these weapons required careful calculation. Terrain, soil stability, and environmental conditions influenced recoil absorption, trajectory alignment, and shell dispersion. Engineers constructed massive support structures and stabilization frameworks, often improvising solutions to accommodate uneven ground or unexpected soil composition. Soldiers meticulously measured angles, accounting for wind, temperature, and air pressure to predict impact with maximum precision. Despite exhaustive planning, minor deviations, and uneven surface, a slight misalignment in the barrel or a miscalculated wind gust could compromise a shot, emphasizing that even the most advanced technology was constrained by natural variables. Operational drills highlighted another limitation: crew coordination. Firing sequences demanded perfect timing among dozens of technicians, artillery operators, and command personnel. Each step, loading shells, aligning the barrel, calculating trajectory, and releasing fire, had to synchronize flawlessly. A single error could result in misfire or catastrophic damage. Stress among crews was constant, as they balanced urgency with the necessity for precision. Over time, soldiers adapted to the pressures, developing protocols and contingency measures to mitigate risk. Yet the inherent complexity remained a persistent challenge, limiting the rate and consistency of fire compared to smaller, more manageable artillery units. Allied intelligence had a profound impact on the supercannon's operational relevance. Reconnaissance flights monitored transport, assembly, and test sites, while resistance operatives provided detailed, real-time reports. Disrupted supply chains, delayed assembly, and targeted sabotage diminished both mobility and strategic threat. Commanders faced the challenge of executing plans while anticipating potential interference. Intelligence officers integrated information from multiple sources to predict firing schedules, identify vulnerabilities, and advise frontline units on mitigation strategies. The interplay of observation, disruption, and anticipation underscored the critical importance of information dominance in modern warfare, often outweighing the advantage of even the most technologically advanced weapons. Mechanical reliability emerged as a persistent concern. The sheer size of components magnified minor defects, while the repetitive stresses of repeated firing exposed weaknesses in metallurgy, welds, and support structures. Maintenance crews worked relentlessly to identify cracks, recalibrate mechanisms, and reinforce structural integrity. Even with constant attention, failures occurred. Shells occasionally lodged within barrels, recoil systems malfunctioned, or alignment mechanisms jammed. Each incident required immediate resolution to prevent accidents, further slowing operations and reducing overall effectiveness. The experience demonstrated that scale alone could not ensure battlefield supremacy. Intricate engineering demanded equally intricate maintenance and oversight. Strategically, the supercannons were intended as a tool of terror as much as a weapon of destruction. Propaganda depicted the cannons as unstoppable forces capable of obliterating entire cities, instilling fear across enemy lines. Yet psychological intimidation proved inconsistent. Allied forces, informed by intelligence and reconnaissance, implemented countermeasures, reducing both the physical and psychological impact. Soldiers and civilians alike learned to view the supercannons with cautious skepticism rather than dread. Over time, operational limitations, mechanical failures, and delays eroded the aura of invincibility, illustrating that fear generated through propaganda could be neutralized through preparedness and strategic awareness. Even successful firings produced mixed results. Shells intended to destroy strategic targets often deviated slightly, striking less critical areas or causing unintended damage. While fortifications were sometimes demolished and supply lines disrupted, the outcomes rarely justified the immense expenditure of resources, labor, and time. Commanders faced the uncomfortable reality that monumental engineering achievements yielded only partial operational success, a discrepancy that exposed the tension between technological ambition and battlefield utility. In contrast, conventional artillery, air raids, and coordinated infantry maneuvers consistently produced predictable, scalable results. The human element remained a decisive factor in both success and failure. Crews endured extreme physical and mental pressures, navigating hazardous conditions, complex calculations, and high-stakes operational expectations. Morale fluctuated based on performance, mechanical reliability, and perceived strategic impact. Engineers, often recruited under duress or conscription, had to balance technical expertise with the practical realities of deployment. Soldiers responsible for both protection and operation navigated enormous stress, learning to improvise, anticipate complications, and adjust plans dynamically. The supercannons, despite their immense size and destructive potential, could not operate without skilled, adaptable human intervention. Resistance and sabotage operations grew increasingly sophisticated. Allied intelligence guided precise attacks on transport routes, assembly sites, and supply chains. Explosives, obstructive measures, and carefully timed interventions delayed operations, sometimes for weeks. Each disruption forced recalibration, improvised repairs, and tactical adjustments, further eroding the supercannon's effectiveness. These operations demonstrated the strategic power of small, coordinated teams acting with intelligence and precision against seemingly insurmountable technological advantages. The narrative of unstoppable force was consistently undermined by resourcefulness, adaptability, and human ingenuity. Weather conditions also imposed severe constraints. Rain, mud, and freezing temperatures hindered transport and assembly, while extreme heat affected metal expansion and mechanical function. Crews had to compensate for environmental factors, sometimes postponing operations or improvising additional stabilization. Even minor miscalculations in environmental adjustments could dramatically alter impact points, reduce range, or create hazards for operators. The interplay of natural conditions with human and mechanical factors revealed a persistent vulnerability. Regardless of ambition or scale, external forces could dictate operational success or failure. The logistical demands of ammunition production were equally formidable. Each shell required specialized metallurgy, precise shaping, and careful handling to avoid premature detonation. Transporting ordnance to firing positions demanded secure, reinforced routes capable of handling immense weight. Delays in production or transport frequently slowed firing schedules, limiting operational flexibility. Engineers and soldiers coordinated closely to manage supply chains, yet constraints persisted, highlighting that even cutting-edge weaponry was only as effective as the support infrastructure sustaining it. Communication posed additional challenges. Secure channels were essential to coordinate movement, firing sequences, and safety protocols. Coded messages and radio transmissions had to be carefully managed to prevent interception by Allied forces. Any lapse risked misalignment, accidental detonation, or operational compromise. The scale and complexity of communication systems required constant vigilance, with each message carrying potential consequences for both success and survival. The technological marvel of the supercannons relied equally on human attention to information, illustrating the intertwined nature of hardware, strategy, and communication in modern warfare. Operational limitations underscored a broader strategic lesson. Technological supremacy alone cannot determine victory. While the supercannons represented extraordinary engineering achievement, battlefield conditions, environmental variables, intelligence, and human factors dictated ultimate effectiveness. Commanders recognized that mobility, adaptability, and coordination were as decisive as raw destructive potential. The supercannons, despite their grandeur and psychological impact, could not compensate for the operational deficiencies inherent in large-scale, inflexible weapon systems. In some engagements, the presence of supercannons forced temporary recalculations by Allied forces, yet long-term effects were minimal. Tactical adjustments, reconnaissance, and targeted sabotage reduced the weapon's strategic value. Allied units adapted quickly, integrating countermeasures and intelligence into broader operational planning. Even when successful shots destroyed infrastructure, the effects were often localized, leaving broader operational objectives intact. This discrepancy between perceived and actual impact highlighted the enduring lesson that strategic influence derives from coordination, adaptability, and execution, rather than sheer size or destructive potential. The cumulative experience of crews, engineers, and commanders reflected a nuanced understanding of both technology and strategy. Operating these weapons demanded extraordinary precision, patience, and adaptability. Failures, delays, and mechanical malfunctions highlighted the limits of engineering when divorced from practical deployment realities. Yet successes, even partial, demonstrated human ingenuity and technical skill, showcasing the complex interplay between ambition, resourcefulness, and battlefield conditions. The supercannons were simultaneously marvels of science and cautionary symbols of overreach, illustrating the fine line between awe-inspiring achievement and operational impracticality. As operations progressed, the limitations of Hitler's supercannons became increasingly apparent. Despite meticulous planning and extraordinary engineering, the weapons struggled to achieve the decisive results envisioned by high command. Transporting the colossal barrels across war-torn landscapes demanded continuous attention, often forcing crews to navigate destroyed infrastructure, crumbling bridges, and damaged rail lines. The sheer scale of the project amplified the smallest misstep, making each stage, from assembly to firing, a delicate balance of precision and endurance. Even experienced crews found themselves facing unpredictable challenges daily, highlighting the human vulnerability behind technological marvels. Assembly sites became hubs of constant activity. Engineers, soldiers, and technicians worked around the clock, ensuring alignment and stabilization were precise to the millimeter. Temporary scaffolds and massive cranes were employed to position barrels, while specialized instruments monitored recoil absorption and trajectory calibration. Each adjustment required coordination across multiple teams, with communication strictly controlled to prevent errors. In addition to the technical challenges, environmental factors such as uneven terrain, rainfall, and temperature fluctuations further complicated operations, sometimes requiring last-minute improvisations to maintain readiness. The human toll of operating the supercannons was profound. Crews endured long hours, extreme stress, and high-stakes responsibility. A misfire could result in catastrophic damage or death, making every calculation, adjustment, and operation critical. Soldiers had to maintain vigilance not only against mechanical failure but also potential enemy observation and sabotage. Fatigue compounded risk, forcing officers to rotate personnel carefully while preserving operational efficiency. Despite the immense pressure, many crews displayed remarkable adaptability, improvising solutions to mechanical failures, environmental challenges, and logistical bottlenecks. Yet the effort required often exceeded what any single unit could sustain indefinitely. Allied forces, informed by intelligence and reconnaissance, adapted rapidly. Observation planes mapped transport routes, identified assembly locations, and monitored firing ranges, providing critical data for countermeasures. Resistance networks disrupted supply chains, sabotaging rail lines and bridges essential for the movement of the massive artillery pieces. Even minor delays could cascade, forcing commanders to recalibrate plans and adjust firing schedules. The interplay between offensive technology and defensive ingenuity underscored a fundamental reality of warfare. Technological superiority alone cannot guarantee success when confronted with adaptive, well-informed adversaries. Firing operations, though awe-inspiring, were fraught with complexity. Calculating trajectories for shells traveling hundreds of kilometers demanded continuous adjustment for wind, temperature, and air pressure. Alignment errors of just a few centimeters could result in missed targets or collateral damage. Premature detonation, barrel stress fractures, and recoil miscalculations added layers of risk. Despite the technological sophistication, achieving a perfect strike was far from guaranteed, and even successful shots often produced localized rather than strategic effects. Each firing operation became a high-stakes test of human skill, mechanical reliability, and environmental awareness. The psychological dimension of operating such formidable weapons was significant. Crews carried the weight of both potential destruction and personal responsibility. Success bolstered morale and confidence, yet misfires or delays bred anxiety and frustration. Officers sought to maintain focus and discipline, understanding that the smallest lapse could result in disaster. The combination of awe, fear, and responsibility created a tense operational environment, where human judgment was as critical as engineering precision. This dynamic highlighted that even the most advanced technology cannot function effectively without skilled, attentive, and psychologically resilient personnel. Logistical coordination remained a continuous challenge. Ammunition production required specialized metallurgical processes, precise shaping, and secure transport to firing sites. Any disruption in the supply chain could halt operations entirely, while simultaneous requirements for maintenance, repair, and assembly further stretched resources. Commanders balanced competing demands, allocating manpower between operational readiness, maintenance, and security. The sheer scale of the endeavor exposed the vulnerabilities of ambitious projects, emphasizing that successful deployment of advanced weaponry depends on an intricate network of support and coordination rather than isolated technological brilliance. Mechanical failures were an ever-present threat. Barrels experienced stress fractures, recoil systems malfunctioned, and alignment mechanisms occasionally jammed. Maintenance crews worked tirelessly to monitor structural integrity, recalibrate instruments, and repair damage. Each failure consumed valuable time and resources, highlighting the inherent fragility of such massive systems. Crews developed contingency protocols, yet even these could not prevent all disruptions. The combination of mechanical complexity, human error potential, and environmental influence revealed that operational effectiveness of these supercannons was inherently limited, no matter the ambition behind their design. Strategically, the supercannons' impact remained inconsistent. While they occasionally destroyed fortifications, rail depots, or supply centers, the effects were often temporary or localized. High Command's vision of terror and decisive battlefield advantage rarely materialized in practice. Frontline commanders frequently prioritized conventional artillery, armored units, and air support, which offered more predictable results with far greater operational flexibility. The supercannons symbolized technological ambition, yet battlefield reality repeatedly demonstrated the limits of scale without adaptability. Allied countermeasures evolved alongside operational experience. Intelligence reports guided targeted strikes on transport routes, assembly sites, and critical components. Sabotage by resistance cells slowed deployment, sometimes forcing weeks-long delays. Reconnaissance allowed the anticipation of firing schedules, enabling units to implement protective measures or evacuate vulnerable positions. These proactive strategies minimized damage, reduced psychological impact, and revealed the operational limitations of even the most formidable weapons. The experience illustrated a broader truth. Innovation is only as effective as the environment in which it operates and the adaptability of opponents confronting it. The supercannon's operational lifespan highlighted an enduring paradox. Immense technological power coexisted with profound vulnerability. Crews managed complex machinery under extreme conditions, yet factors beyond their control, terrain, weather, mechanical imperfection, and enemy action, repeatedly undermined effectiveness. The ambitious designs offered a stark contrast between visionary engineering and practical battlefield utility. Even when partially successful, the weapons required enormous human effort, resource allocation, and logistical planning, raising critical questions about the cost-to-benefit ratio of such undertakings in the theater of war. Maintenance and repair remained central concerns. Barrels were inspected daily for microfractures, alignment devices recalibrated, and recoil systems tested under controlled conditions. Each inspection demanded skill and patience, as even minor oversights could result in catastrophic failure. Spare parts, often transported under tight security, were essential to sustain operations, yet any interruption in the supply chain threatened readiness. Soldiers and engineers coordinated closely, blending technical expertise with operational experience to maintain functionality. Despite this meticulous attention, failures remained frequent, demonstrating that human oversight and mechanical precision were inextricably linked in the performance of these supercannons. Environmental variables imposed relentless challenges. Rain softened soil beneath support structures, while heat caused metal expansion affecting barrel alignment. Cold conditions increased brittleness in certain components, heightening the risk of fractures during firing. Crews adapted through a combination of preemptive reinforcement, real-time measurement adjustments, and careful monitoring. Yet the interplay of mechanical, human, and environmental factors meant that operational success was never guaranteed. The supercannons, despite their scale, remained subject to natural and practical limitations, emphasizing that technology alone cannot dominate complex, dynamic systems such as battlefields. Psychological resilience proved as critical as technical proficiency. Crews operated under constant scrutiny from command, pressure to perform, and awareness of the immense destructive potential at their disposal. Mistakes carried lethal consequences, intensifying stress and requiring sustained focus. Officers implemented rotation systems, briefings, and morale-boosting measures to maintain operational efficiency. The experience demonstrated that even cutting-edge weapons rely on the endurance, adaptability, and composure of the humans tasked with operating them. A lesson as enduring as any tactical insight derived from the supercannons themselves. Despite the enormous investment, strategic impact remained limited. The supercannons inflicted damage sporadically, disrupted supply lines temporarily, and inspired awe in propaganda. Yet their mobility constraints, mechanical vulnerabilities, and susceptibility to countermeasures prevented decisive influence on the course of battles. Commanders increasingly relied on conventional artillery, armored divisions, and air power to achieve operational objectives, recognizing that flexibility and adaptability outweighed sheer destructive capacity. The supercannons symbolized ambition, ingenuity, and human effort, yet battlefield reality continually tempered expectations. The legacy of these operations endured beyond immediate tactical results. Engineers, soldiers, and observers learned invaluable lessons about the interplay between scale, precision, logistics, and human endurance. The experience highlighted the importance of adaptability, coordination, and intelligence in translating technological potential into battlefield effectiveness. The supercannons, while impressive, became case studies in the limits of ambition, illustrating that even the most extraordinary technological achievements must contend with environmental, logistical, and human constraints to achieve lasting strategic impact. As the war advanced, the operational reality of Hitler's supercannons became undeniably clear. The immense weapons, celebrated in propaganda as decisive tools, increasingly revealed their limitations. Deployments were delayed by logistical challenges, environmental constraints, and mechanical failures, while crews endured extraordinary physical and mental strain. The vision of unstoppable, city-shattering firepower remained largely aspirational. Even successful strikes yielded only temporary or localized disruption. The discrepancy between the ambitions of designers and the tactical realities on the battlefield created a paradox that commanders and engineers had to confront continuously. Despite the impressive scale, mobility remained a persistent vulnerability. Rail and road transport demanded enormous planning and resources, while sabotage by resistance movements frequently delayed or halted operations. Explosives, obstruction, and careful targeting of infrastructure forced improvisation and recalibration at each stage. Every movement became a carefully calculated risk, with the possibility of enemy observation or interference ever present. The colossal size that made the supercannons so intimidating also made them slow, conspicuous, and vulnerable. Unlike smaller, more adaptable artillery, these weapons could not be easily repositioned or concealed, reducing their strategic flexibility. Mechanical complexity compounded these operational difficulties. Barrels, each meticulously engineered to survive immense pressures, required constant inspection for microfractures and alignment errors. Recoil systems, designed to absorb extraordinary energy, often demanded recalibration after each firing. Components subjected to repeated stress risked catastrophic failure, necessitating highly trained maintenance crews on site at all times. Even the most minor oversight could result in serious accidents. Over time, it became clear that the maintenance burden alone significantly limited the practical effectiveness of these massive weapons, illustrating a fundamental principle. Scale without operational manageability undermines battlefield value. Crew coordination remained an ongoing challenge. Operating such sophisticated machinery required precise timing among dozens of personnel, from engineers and artillery operators to safety officers and command staff. Every loading sequence, trajectory adjustment, and firing command had to align perfectly. Fatigue, stress, and environmental factors increased the risk of errors, demanding rigorous discipline and training. Despite these pressures, soldiers and engineers developed adaptive techniques, refining protocols to mitigate risk and maintain operational capability. Their resilience highlighted the indispensable role of human skill and judgment in converting technological potential into practical effect. Allied intelligence proved decisive in neutralizing the perceived threat of the supercannons. Reconnaissance planes provided detailed maps of transport routes, assembly locations, and firing positions. Resistance operatives executed sabotage with precision, targeting supply lines, bridges, and railways to delay or prevent deployment. Even localized interference could cascade into significant operational disruption, forcing German engineers to divert resources to repairs and adjustments. These efforts reduced the strategic influence of the supercannons and underscored the vulnerability of even the most advanced weapons to well-coordinated intelligence and countermeasures. Weather and terrain remained uncontrollable variables. Rain softened soil beneath support structures, heat caused expansion in metal components, and cold increased brittleness in critical parts. Crews improvised constantly, reinforcing stabilization platforms, recalibrating alignments, and adjusting firing procedures to account for environmental fluctuations. Yet the unpredictability of natural conditions meant that even the most meticulously planned operations were subject to chance. This interplay between mechanical sophistication, human effort, and environmental forces emphasized that no weapon, regardless of scale, operates in isolation from the conditions around it. Operational success was uneven. While some firing missions destroyed fortifications or disrupted supply chains, many others produced minimal strategic advantage. Shells occasionally missed targets or caused damage in unintended areas. Even when a strike achieved its immediate objective, logistical demands and operational delays often diminished the broader tactical impact. High Command's aspiration for psychological intimidation and battlefield dominance faced consistent counteraction by intelligence, countermeasures, and adaptive allied strategies. The gap between expectation and reality grew increasingly pronounced, revealing the limits of technological ambition when confronted with practical constraints. The psychological impact on crews was complex. Pride in operating cutting-edge technology existed alongside constant anxiety over mechanical failures, misfires, and environmental unpredictability. Commanders maintained strict discipline, yet the high stakes meant that morale fluctuated with operational success and failure. The knowledge that human lives, resources, and national expectations rested on their performance added pressure, reinforcing the intricate relationship between human resilience and technological operation. Over time, crews became adept at managing stress, improvising solutions, and sustaining focus despite the ever-present risk inherent in every operation. Strategically, the supercannon's influence waned as the war progressed. The massive investment in material, manpower, and planning yielded limited return in terms of decisive battlefield outcomes. Conventional artillery, air support, and coordinated infantry operations consistently achieved predictable, scalable results. Commanders increasingly recognized that flexibility, adaptability, and reliability outweighed sheer destructive potential. The supercannons remained symbols of engineering brilliance, yet their operational limitations prevented them from altering the trajectory of battles or providing the decisive advantage envisioned by Hitler and his command. The interplay between ambition and practicality became a defining lesson. The supercannons embodied human ingenuity, technical skill, and the desire to achieve unprecedented destructive power. Yet their operational realities, logistical complexity, mechanical fragility, environmental constraints, and human factors demonstrated that technological marvels alone cannot secure victory. Success in warfare requires an integration of innovation, adaptability, intelligence, and execution. The supercannons, impressive in conception and scale, ultimately reinforced the importance of balanced, practical approaches to strategy over mere spectacle. Maintenance, repair, and continuous oversight were relentless requirements. Crews inspected barrels for microfractures, recalibrated alignment systems, and tested recoil mechanisms after each firing sequence. Any lapse could result in catastrophic failure or operational delays. Engineers and operators collaborated closely, blending technical expertise with real-time problem-solving. Even minor environmental shifts, temperature, humidity, or soil conditions, required immediate adaptation. The constant need for vigilance underscored that operational success was as dependent on sustained human effort as on mechanical design. Allied counteractions further constrained effectiveness. Sabotage, reconnaissance, and tactical intelligence forced German engineers to operate defensively, dedicating resources to prevent disruption rather than focusing solely on offensive impact. Supply chains were continuously threatened, requiring protective measures, rerouting, and rapid repair of infrastructure. Crews adapted, improvising solutions and adjusting operational schedules. Yet these defensive efforts consumed significant manpower and time. The supercannon's vulnerability to organized, well-informed adversaries highlighted the interplay between innovation and strategic context in modern warfare. Even partial successes underscored the broader lessons. While individual strikes occasionally disrupted supply lines or fortifications, they rarely produced lasting strategic impact. The enormous resources required to deploy and operate these weapons often outweighed the benefits achieved. Commanders increasingly relied on more agile, flexible systems capable of consistent performance across varied conditions. The supercannons, remarkable in conception, exemplified the limits of scale when divorced from operational practicality. In conclusion, the legacy of Hitler's supercannons extends beyond immediate battlefield outcomes. They represent a convergence of ambition, engineering brilliance, human skill, and logistical challenge. Their history illustrates the delicate balance between technological innovation and practical utility, emphasizing that even extraordinary inventions must contend with human, environmental, and strategic realities. The weapon scale inspired awe and captured imagination, Yet their operational limitations prevented them from achieving the decisive influence envisioned by their creators. Ultimately, the story of these supercannons is a cautionary tale about the limits of ambition without adaptability. They symbolize both human ingenuity and the constraints imposed by reality, demonstrating that success in warfare arises from a combination of skill, strategy, and the ability to harmonize technology with the complex, unpredictable conditions of the battlefield. The supercannons, in their grandeur and imperfection, remain enduring examples of how ambition, innovation, and operational context intersect in the theater of war.